Canada just answered Washington with retaliatory tariffs as high as 50% on hundreds of American products, days after trade talks between the two countries fell apart. The Secret Service says it is aware of a video aired on Iranian state media threatening President Donald Trump's youngest son, Barron Trump, showing locations tied to his whereabouts. Senate Democrats are demanding answers from Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. about money tied to a vaccine lawsuit he helped launch before taking office. And there is more. The wife of an active-duty Army sergeant deported to Honduras, an Air Force major criminally charged after calling for the president's impeachment on the Capitol steps, and a Justice Department threat to demolish the Kennedy Center outright. 6 stories about money and power. Best first. Stay to the end, because the last one is the one nobody saw coming. Canada is done waiting. On Tuesday, Canada announced retaliatory tariffs on hundreds of American products, with rates running as high as 50%. The timing is the whole story. This landed just days after negotiations between the two countries collapsed. Here is what a retaliatory tariff actually is, because the word gets thrown around loosely. It is a tax collected at the border on goods coming in. The importer pays it, and a large share of that cost usually travels down the chain to the businesses and the households buying the product. So when Canada targets hundreds of American goods, it is aiming at American exporters, at the workers who make those goods, and at the price Canadians see on the shelf. 50% is not a warning shot. At that rate, the tax is half the value of the product itself, which is often enough to price an American supplier out of the market entirely and hand that sale to a competitor somewhere else. That is the part that lingers, because supply relationships lost in a trade fight do not automatically come back when the politics cool off. What to watch next? Whether the talks restart, whether Washington answers with tariffs of its own, and exactly which product categories ended up on Canada's list, reported by The Hill. A threat aired on national television, and the Secret Service says it knows about it. The United States Secret Service said it is aware of a video broadcast on Iranian state media threatening President Donald Trump's youngest son, Barron Trump. According to the report, the video depicts locations associated with the younger Trump's whereabouts. This is unfolding against the backdrop of the ongoing conflict between the United States and Iran, with Iran threatening retaliation as Washington tightens economic sanctions and moves to choke off the flow of Iranian oil. Context matters here. Former Secret Service agent Tim Miller has described an elevated security environment around the president, pointing to assassination plots and an image of Trump in a casket, and arguing the agency needs significant resources to get ahead of a threat level he calls unprecedented, one that involves both foreign actors and domestic hate groups. Why this matters beyond one family: protective operations cost taxpayer money, and a threat that names a private family member rather than an office holder widens the perimeter the government has to defend. It also raises the temperature on an already tense standoff with Tehran, at a moment when sanctions are squeezing Iranian exports. What happens next is a security response the public will mostly never see, reported by Fox News. A soldier is serving. His wife was just put on a plane. Multiple outlets report that Christy Mariori Villafranca Trejo, the wife of active-duty Army Sergeant Hedar Leonel Tercios Juarez, has been deported to Honduras, the country where she was born. It is the latest case of a family member of an American service member being swept up in the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. Understand what that phrase means in practice. Enforcement priorities decide who gets picked up, and when those priorities broaden, they stop tracking neatly with the categories the public assumes are protected, including the households of people currently wearing the uniform. Military families are unusually exposed to this. They move where the orders send them. They often live on a single income while one spouse deploys or trains, and legal processes that take months do not pause because a unit ships out. The money side is brutal and simple. A deportation can cut a household's earners in half, add international travel and legal costs on top, and leave a service member trying to fight a case from a base hundreds of miles away. The question now is whether this stays a one-off or becomes a pattern that Congress is forced to address, reported by The Hill. This one is about a conflict of interest at the top of American public health. Several Senate Democrats are questioning whether Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. truly divested his financial interests in a lawsuit he helped spearhead, a case challenging the human papillomavirus vaccine sold as Gardasil. Before he was confirmed as secretary, Kennedy was part of that litigation, which was led by the law firm Wisner Baum against the vaccine's manufacturer. The senators are pressing on whether the financial tie was actually cut and what happens to any money from a settlement in that case. Why this is a money and power story and not just a paperwork story. The Secretary of Health and Human Services sits atop the agencies that license vaccines, recommend who gets them, and shape whether insurers pay for them. If the person making those calls still holds an economic stake in litigation attacking a specific vaccine, then every decision touching that product carries a question mark, fair or not. That uncertainty has a price for parents, for doctors deciding what to recommend, and for the manufacturers whose stock moves on federal signals. What comes next is a paper trail fight, senators asking for documentation and the department deciding how much of it to hand over. Reported by The Hill. An officer stood on the steps of the Capitol twice and called for the president's impeachment. Now, he is criminally charged. Air Force Major Jason Watson is accused of breaking multiple military laws. According to the charges, that includes 3 violations of Article 88 for making contemptuous remarks about President Donald Trump and 5 violations of Article 92 for disobeying orders. 8 alleged violations in total. These are allegations. Watson has not been convicted, and a military justice process still has to play out. Here's the context civilians usually miss. Service members do not carry the same free speech protections as the rest of us. Article 88 specifically bars commissioned officers from using contemptuous words against the president and other named officials, and it exists to keep the armed forces out of partisan politics. What is unusual is not the rule, it is seeing it actually enforced, because prosecutions under that article are rare. For anyone in uniform, the practical stakes are enormous. A conviction can end a career, and with it, a pension, a security clearance, and the earning power that comes from both. Watch whether this proceeds to a court-martial and whether the case becomes the test that defines where the line sits. Reported by The Hill. And here's the one nobody saw coming. The Trump administration has threatened to demolish the Kennedy Center if a judge rules that the Performing Arts Center cannot close for a 2-year renovation. That threat is in writing. In court filings on Monday, Justice Department Attorney Brantley T. Mayers repeatedly described the Kennedy Center as decrepit, a structure he says is in dire need of the renovations being led by the administration under President Donald Trump. So the legal posture is essentially this. Let us shut it for 2 years and rebuild it, or we tear it down. Think about what a 2-year closure alone means in dollars. A national performing arts venue employs stagehands, ushers, box office staff, technicians, and administrators, and it anchors restaurants, parking operators, and hotels around it. 2 dark years is 2 years of that payroll and that surrounding spending in question before anyone reaches for a wrecking ball. It is also a public asset, which means taxpayers own the downside either way. What happens next sits with the judge weighing whether the closure can proceed. The threat of demolition is now formally part of what that judge has been asked to consider, reported by The Hill. Watch 2 things this week. Whether Washington answers Canada's tariffs with its own, and whether that judge lets the Kennedy Center close or calls the demolition threat what critics say it is. So which one hits your wallet first, the tariffs or the trade talks that produce them? Tell me in the comments. If this was worth your 9 minutes, hit like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.